Okay, so our next step is to drill this hole here, which is going to accept the end of our coil to thread into our stop block for our coil. And so with that hole being there, you'll be able to see where that will actually screw into our stop block. And then with that being screwed into that, then we will have our other piece of our clamp that will come down and hold that solid. So if we flip our coil around, you can see how that sits kind of in that saddle there. And then when this comes down over the top, you'll see that the little gap that we have there will enable this to clamp down securely onto our coil. And this section here will allow us to move this in and out a minute fraction to get just the right spacing per coil. So we have to drill this hole. We're going to use the drill bit, which I've already attached our Forstner bit to, as you can see here. So all we have to do is take the center mark that was left from when we drilled our main hole here, and that center hole will line up with our center pin on our Forstner bit, and then we'll be able to drill this hole perfectly in the center, like you can see this hole here. Now you'll notice that there is a little step right here. Not sure if you can quite see that on camera. Get in here a little closer. You can see this little step. This step right here was needed so that when the coil becomes totally flush, you can see that there leaves a little space there. And that's so that we can feed our wires out the top so that we can make our connections and still be able to adjust our coil in and out without having an interference with our wires. So that's why that was very important. So I'll go ahead and show you how to drill this hole. Okay, so as you can see, when our drill bit comes down, I've got that aligned so that it will go directly into where our through hole is. And so I'll go ahead and make that cut. I have the drill press on its slowest speed, so we'll make sure to make really nice cuts here. What I'll do is I'll drill this down just enough until we start making the cut here. And then what I'll do is I'm just going to check that with our coil. You can see that we've drilled that so that it's pretty flush there. I'm going to knock the sawdust off here. And then what I'm going to do is just line that up with the coil and make sure that we are centered where the coil should be, just to double verify. And yeah, that looks real good. Okay, so now we can go ahead and finish our cut. We're going to make sure that we line ourselves back up, and then we'll go ahead and make our cut. And as you can see, we've got a nice, even cut. And so what I'll do is I'll stop there, and I'm going to clean off our drill bit. Clean out our hole, and then we'll continue on. So I'll line this back up. And I've already set our stop on our depth, so we know exactly where to go to on our depth. So what I'll do is I'll just raise and lower this a couple of times just to smooth out the hole. And there you can see our finished hole. And that's directly in the center of our larger hole, which means when we screw our coil in, it'll be exactly into the center. And we'll just clean off the little residual that is on the drill bit. And that's finished. So this depth that we drilled our hole in is a little bit deeper than the maximum on our coil. And the reason for that is just so that we have a little bit of leeway should we need to drill this hole down just a little bit more, then we have a little bit of room to do that without having to re-drill 2 holes. So we've got that set completely. Okay, so our next step is going to be to cut a slight groove in our block all the way up to this line and at this thickness, so that our bolt will be able to go in here and this block will be able to slide back and forth on our bolts until we tighten them down. And once we tighten them down, that'll cause this to be attached to our base, and then our rotor sits in between our 2 jigs, and that's how we can adjust this to fine-tune our length and distance on this, and then we can fine-tune with rotating our coil. So that's going to be our next step, is to cut this groove right here, and I'm going to get everything set up, and then I'll... Okay, so our next step is putting our bolts in, and all we do for this is, since those bolts are tapped at the bottom here, all we have to do is just screw these straight in. And remember, these holes that are here in the top are large enough to slide down over our bolts after we cut the tops off. So we're going to use our screwdriver, we're going to screw these down in the block, and then we're going to cut these ends off. And I'm going to show you how to put one in that's very simple. Again, these are just from the home improvement store. They're from a company here in the U.S. It's the blue box. That should give it away. But they come in. They have a slight taper at the start, which makes them really good to get started. So all you have to do for these is really simple. Just take and set it over the hole. I usually will start it just till I feel it grab with my fingers, and you'll feel it grab. And then if you've sized the hole correctly, all you have to do basically is just screw these right on in and screw them down until they stop. It takes just a minute to screw them down in, but it doesn't take much force because we've got them set. And you'll see when it stops, you'll see it kind of bounce back a little bit. You know that that's as far as it's going to go. And as you can see, they'll all screw in so that they're all the same height. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of these 3. Then we'll go ahead and cut our tops off, and we'll be ready for... Okay, so very simply what I did was I took and cut off the screw tops of these bolts, and I slightly rounded the ends so it makes it easier to insert. And I just did that with a block with some sandpaper wrapped around it. Pretty simple. You could use a file if you wanted to, but I just had sandpaper and a block here, so I used it. And you'll notice that these 4 pins here will line up with our 4 pins here, or our 4 holes. And then all this block does is just goes on and slides right down on, and that's going to capture our coil. So if our coil was properly inserted in here this way, it would thread into the back, and then this would be where our clamp is going to go. So I can show you if I just simply put our coil in and clamp this down, you can see that just by its weight, it holds the coil in quite nicely. And if I show a close-up here, you can see that we've still got a little bit of gap on each side of where this coil is, because I oversized this hole up here just a little bit so that I can add more sized coil to it if I wanted to. If I wanted to make the coil a little bit larger, then I could do that without having to remake a block or drilling the hole out larger. So this will all get clamped together with our clamps, and I'll show you the final assembly in just a few minutes. But that's basically how that goes, and then this will raise back up off of our coil, and then we would be able to unscrew our coil to set it for a new depth, and then this will go back down and clamp back down on our coil to re-secure it. And so that's how that's going to happen, but these threads of course will be on the inside, threaded into our hole that we had previously drilled, and that would be that hole that's in the back there. So that's pretty much as easy as it is, and this does fit pretty snug. And if we push that down to where that everything is straight and level, Then this was the 2 gaps that were cut out by the table saw. This gap back here is where we're going to feed our wires out from the back of our coil once it's set. And then this gap here enabled us to go ahead and put extra pressure down on a smaller sized coil if we needed to. It can also expand up for a larger sized coil to put in here as well if necessary. So it's very versatile, and we can test several size coils with this one jig, and it's very strong, very secure. You'll notice that both sides, both edges, line up exactly with each side. If I grab my straight edge and I put that up against, you can see that they line up perfectly with each side. That means that our center hole is perfectly aligned from all angles. Everything is perfectly in alignment. And that way we make sure that our centers are exactly centered, and we can make our calculations based upon that.